I may have a problem, and I'm trying to deal with it as best as possible. I mean, I'm not sure if it's really a problem. I don't know. You tell me. I know a lot of movie references and quotes, and sometimes I use them in several situations, and I don't really read the room, so I just throw them out. The other day, I was with this woman, as an example. As they say, one thing leads to another, and, well, you know. In the moment of intimacy, that's what it is. When I pulled my pants down, I told her, "Say hello to my little friend!" Apparently, she never saw Scarface, so that was a little bit of an awkward moment right there. And she was really giving me this look, and so I said, "Judge me by my size, do you?" She hasn't seen Star Wars either. Well, that look she was giving me was really, "So you have chosen death." And guess what? She never saw Lord of the Rings either. Clearly not the kind of woman for me. Well, now, let's go straight to today's video concerning Saint Patrick. I've talked about this subject before on another video, but today I would like to tie up some loose ends, very loose ends, and express a few thoughts. St. Patrick's Day is a very important yearly holiday in Ireland, a celebration, a feast, a religious and cultural holiday marking the traditional death of Ireland's favorite patron saint. It is an official Christian feast day since the early 17th century in Ireland. And I cannot underline enough that it is important and makes sense in Ireland for the Irish in Irish history. Everywhere else in the world, this feast makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, aside, of course, probably from being celebrated by Irish immigrants and their descendants, of course. Still, outside Ireland, it has been turned into something quite weird, to say the least, that has little to nothing to do with Ireland's holiday. Outside Ireland, this celebration is usually a green mess of a stereotypical vulgar circus where everyone is Irish for a day and an excuse to drink like some kind of a leprechaun nightmare orgy. Even more strange than that, perhaps, are modern pagans celebrating this day and actually including it in their yearly pagan celebrations, be those Irish descendants or none of the above, well, pagans in general. Why would a pagan person celebrate St. Patrick's Day? I do get it that some of us pagans still enjoy celebrating, for instance, Christmas. We did that before taking our first steps into paganism, and we continue to do that with our non-pagan family members. It is a good moment of the year to be with family and continue on with certain traditions and customs that makes us happy and give us good memories. Sure, certainly. And of course, Christmas does have quite a bit of pagan themes in it, so we can more or less mix things up as the celebration itself is a mashup of several cultures and belief systems. No, not the bloody tree. The tree is pretty cool and decorating it is awesome, but it isn't a pagan or of pagan origins. The decoration of the Christmas tree is a Christian, to be more precise, Protestant tradition of the 16th century. The reindeers are not pagan either. They were added to the Santa motif in 1822 in the story of Clement Clarke Moore. But I'm not here to talk about Christmas or ruin Christmas for you. I'm here to talk about and ruin St. Patrick's Day. Just to make a point, right, that I do get modern pagans celebrating Christmas with their families. Now, modern pagans celebrating St. Patrick's Day, that's strange, but not entirely unheard of, and perhaps under certain perspectives it can indeed make sense for modern pagans, but we shall get there in a moment. But I mean, St. Patrick famously converted Ireland to Christianity. That's what this celebration is about, a triumph of Christianity over paganism. St. Patrick driving the serpents out of Ireland and so on and so forth. It is an historical event of cultural genocide, but this, of course, under the importance Christianity has given to St. Patrick and his religious efforts in Ireland. This is what this celebration is about under the Church's perception, later Church's perception. And that's the narrative that is being expressed which is why it doesn't make sense for modern pagans to celebrate it, unless. You see, historically speaking, St. Patrick has far too much credit when it comes to the Christianization of Ireland. Many have come before him and after. And it is important to say that one man doesn't have the power to turn an entire people into Christians so quickly. Historically speaking, the Irish had colonies elsewhere outside Ireland, such as in Wales, Cornwall, and other places in Roman and non-Roman Britain, or Brittany. Before St. Patrick, and frankly before any Christian missionary, the ancient Irish had already had early contact with Christianity through their colonies and contact with Christian Romans. In fact, the Irish themselves were responsible for bringing Christianity into Ireland. As far as we are able to determine so far through archaeology and historical documentation, Ireland never suffered from Roman colonization. In fact, others in the British Isles suffered from Irish colonization. Christianity did not enter Ireland through Romanization. Instead, it was the Irish that progressively brought Christianity into their own home. St. Patrick pretty much has had his job made easier for him through the course of many years before he was even born. As a matter of fact, indeed, St. Patrick receives too much credit since his earliest documented biographies are from the 7th century, practically 2 centuries after he was long gone. And only in the 11th century, this whole event of him Christianizing Ireland and kicking out the serpents finally comes up. As I said, St. Patrick was not the first bishop in Ireland. By his time, and when he took upon himself to do some missionary work in the early 5th century and waddle about, Ireland back then already had a small but settled and concise Christian population, complete with churches, monasteries, priests, and bishops. The Irish were very much aware of Christianity before St. Patrick. The Irish were not particularly concerned with Christianity at the time because it was not a threat to them, because it was incorporated into their pagan beliefs. Curiously, Christians at the time in Ireland didn't bother much in trying to convert anyone, since, as said before, the Irish themselves brought Christianity to Ireland, and there wasn't much stress about it. St. Patrick was a little bit different when compared to the other Irish Christians of the time, as he was an evangelist. So, indeed, he did seek to convert people, but he did not have a lot of success in the process, most likely because the Irish were much more interested in adopting Christianity by themselves, since they were the ones, again, to bring it into Ireland, but were not having anyone or anything trying to force them into it, despite its successful establishment on the island. After Patrick's death, Ireland remained pagan for a couple of generations before the population became mostly Christian. And then that was when the tale of St. Patrick really started to gain roots in the 7th century, about 200 years after Patrick's death. And the Patrick of this Christian tale and in his hagiography is quite different than the historical Patrick, to the point that they look like two different persons. And in fact, when studying the history of St. Patrick, we do have to make a difference between the historical Patrick and the St. Patrick of the later tales. The later St. Patrick is a walking wonder, miracle performer, said to have completely annihilated the Druids in Ireland. It's a mythic Patrick, an heroic Patrick. The famous St. Patrick we hear so much about is an appealing story for a 7th century Irish audience, because the real historical one was just pretty dull. The Patrick we are familiar with today is mostly a mythic figure, an Irish Christian tale for a specific political and religious agenda. to an audience that finally in the 7th century was already mostly Christian, not by force, but by a progressive historical inclination of the Irish to become ever more Christian. The actual historical Patrick didn't actually do much. Hundreds of years later, after his death, he became a powerful figure by the hands of the churches he had found, and the church in general was looking to complete the conversion of the remaining pagans. So they made Patrick into this super awesome, heroic, miracle worker, badass, holy Terminator T-800 bit of a prick. This whole theme of Irish pagans and druids countering St. Patrick's missionary work gained a whole other perspective and importance in much later centuries under the influence of biblical parallels and incorporating Patrick into older mythological Irish themes. This major event and others of his miracles, if they did occur at all, gained too much attention and importance in later periods to suit political agendas of such periods. There's a great probability that the very few appearances of druids in documents attributed to St. Patrick himself were composed long after his death. In other words, historically speaking, he didn't do much. It's like Columbus. People celebrate Columbus Day, and in parentheses, what the fuck, which is the celebration of colonialism and genocide. But Columbus didn't do much either. He didn't discover shite. And not just because you cannot discover a place that has already people living in it, but long before Columbus, other Europeans had been in the Americas, namely Icelandic explorers, and a very early alliance between the Portuguese and the Danes, who went out to explore, colonize, and an effort to exploit land and resources in what we know now as Canada and northeastern United States, many decades before Columbus, which in fact this European expedition led by the Portuguese left really detailed maps of North America, which Columbus just had to read and follow. Well, returning to the old boy Patrick, there's also other important historical realities that further indicate that St. Patrick did not thrive against the pagans as Christianity leads us to believe, nor did he converted Ireland to Christianity. I wouldn't say that paganism thrived, but definitely continued to exist in Ireland for a couple of generations long after Patrick's death. The thing with paganism has always been, in a nutshell of course, actually more accurate, polytheism has always been an open system. So religious and cultural syncretism has always been part of the dynamics of polytheism. The Irish indeed brought Christianity into Ireland. So it is only natural that the Christian faith, along with the old Irish belief systems, thrived and coexisted for some centuries. A more concrete Christianization of Ireland would only take place around the 14th century, as it progressively replaced paganism due to the tendency of people abandoning old customs and traditions in favor of new trends and obviously new systems of governance and rulership. St. Patrick's Day kind of promotes something between the lines of cultural genocide. However, with Patrick himself, there was no actual Irish pagan genocide. There is no proof of any great violent Druid purge in Ireland. The only evidences come in the biographical works written about Patrick much later after his death. Besides, it would be rather strange Patrick leading some sort of religious war against the Druids, since of actual Druids, there's little evidence on this Iron Age priestly class. As I've pointed out on a past video concerning the Druids and what we truly know about them, much of what we know about this social class follows the same pattern as St. Patrick's great achievements, written long after they were gone. What we truly know about the Druids, especially from archaeological sources and, of course, actual Druids of the Iron Age British, Gaulish and Irish societies, is that their religions and belief systems were polytheistic and centered around many local deities and shrines. That's it. Now, the Druids that came after, and on them the great majority of sources speak of, were not even pagan. They resembled in nothing what we truly know about the actual Druids. But more on that other previous video, don't worry. The literary evidences we have on St. Patrick and a genocide of pagans, a Druid purge, kicking out snakes, serpents, danger noodles, and so on and so forth, come much later when Irish paganism was already a little glimpse, a shy shadow of its former self, and Irish Christianity the dominant religious force on the island. The aim of Christianity on Ireland with these stories was to create heroic Irish saints. Overall, the first centuries, the first millennium, the first 1,000 years of Christianity in Europe, in most cases, not all of course, the Church cared little about eradicating traces of paganism, as the Church had to be quite benevolent with pagans, promoting a religious syncretism and even allowing pagans, or allowing pagan feasts and celebrations, allowing the pagans to celebrate, those events to still occur, even within the grounds of the Church. However, of course, unwillingly, the heroization of saints would indeed have a great weight on later Christian religious propaganda. And for this very reason, it would have been impossible for the actual historical Patrick to convert Ireland to Christianity by force, as by his time, paganism was still a strong force in Ireland. Not the only religious reality in Ireland, but definitely still a force to be reckoned with. And the pagan Irish would not have tolerated Patrick's behavior of the tales of the mythical, heroic Christian stories. By this time, Christianity would not have succeeded if it had been imposed. It was precisely avoiding conversion by force and imposition that led to Christianity's success on Ireland. The snakes St. Patrick supposedly drove out were not the pagans, were not the Druids. Frankly, on a more careful look concerning these stories about saints, which match with many other similar stories, the idea of serpents, snakes, toads, and dragons as creatures somewhat defeated by saints were actually meant to be quite literal, the animals themselves, and not a metaphor for anything, which is, quite frankly, obviously disappointing. And much of the idea that I have had and shared with you some years back on other videos about this idea of snakes being pagans, which matches with serpent, snake, and dragon cults and religious belief systems of the Celtic world, and namely with cultures and civilizations that have shared Iron Age history with the British Isles and the British Iron Age populations. Such is the case of the peoples of what we know now as northern Spain and northern Portugal along the Atlantic, right? Despite the very interesting patterns, it has nothing to do with actual paganism, sadly. I've said this before, we humans have the natural tendency to find patterns that are not real, that have no connection, which are often failures of thought of the brain, as the brain tries to match information, creating illusions. This is a concrete case of that. St. Patrick never drove out the pagans, much less the Druids. He did not fight against the serpent cult. He was just a Christian figure made a hero in later hagiography, long after his death, and longer still after the Druids were gone. And indeed, yes, I know, Ireland never had serpents. What I mean by these stories and their messages meaning to be quite literally the animals, it's certainly not because saints actually fought serpents, toads, and dragons. It is quite literally in the Christian religious perception of what these animals mean or represent in a Christian system of beliefs. They mean darkness, they mean evil, they mean the devil. Saint Patrick kicking out serpents was neither him driving away pagans and druids, nor actually driving off actual animals, but instead quite in the literal sense of it, as in driving away, defeating, eradicating evil, and the representative animals of darkness and evil under the Christian religious themes. Many aspects of Saint Patrick's story seem indeed to purposely involve this figure in older mythology, particularly on stories and myths familiar to the Irish, obviously, particularly replacing certain pagan Irish deities by Saint Patrick in myths that present a narrative of fighting off the forces of darkness and chaos to secure the harvest and other important aspects of the daily lives of the Irish in the Iron Age to the Middle Ages. Over time, the new religion replaced the old. As such, through the course of time, biblical and mythological themes blend. But I know I'm well aware that the idea of Patrick kicking out the snakes/pagans and the druids will remain a popular one, especially among neo-pagans, as some form of a cultural resistance that never actually existed, but it does give some sort of a reason to also celebrate St. Patrick's Day, but in a reverse kind of way, which is frankly ridiculous from the moment, of course, we already know the truth. Why bother about something that never happened and demonize a figure that did not actually do much? What we once held to be true turned into a fantasy, and now the fantasy reveals the truth. Continuing to believe in the fantasy or moving on, it's a choice. However, St. Patrick is indeed an icon and part of Irish history and identity. And it makes perfect sense for the Irish to celebrate this day. Hell, it even makes sense for Irish neo-pagans to celebrate this day because, and as much as it may be hard to hear it, Christianity at some point really became an important part of Celtic heritage. The effort to try to separate the Christian from the pagan, in most cases all over Europe, is a pointless effort if indeed we are focusing on the real historical flow of events, because Christian beliefs have blended so well with pagan ones that it is almost impossible to really discern and separate or discern where paganism ends and Christianity begins. And not only because polytheisms have always been open systems and adopting, accepting and incorporating others' beliefs has always been the foundations of polytheism, but also because much of the written sources on paganism and pagan themes and pagan mythology were composed by Christians. And not only that, but the religious syncretism was so strong that the festivities, celebrations, and gods and saints blend together to form a more concise heritage. St. Patrick's Day has had a huge role in Irish history and identity, and understanding its roots is vital to understand its connection to Irish history and culture, but also to understand a bigger panorama of Irish identity. We, as pagans, should not be so quick in either trying to erase such holidays or embrace them, neither to truly disconnect from saints nor totally embrace them. There are deep layers of history behind this history of saints that are important to study in order to comprehend our identities and to understand where we have come from, where we went, and where we are going. We can continue to do the effort to move away from such systems and try to build and rebuild other systems that call upon old systems of belief, a lot more tied to land and its peoples and its persons, to promote respect, equality, and a more conscious approach to reconnectedness to land and other important issues modern paganism tries to promote and establish. And to do that, we can and have to find better and proper replacements for such holidays. And and to replacements to the more negative messages they cultivate and propagate. Organic replacements that go much more in line with the celebrations without promoting the negative aspects of them that further give life to malicious societal and religious patterns. For this to happen, we do need to better understand the non-pagan parts of our history, to better establish and comprehend identities which are fundamental in the creation of beneficial and respectful relationships with land and its persons. And now, I leave you alone. I hope you have enjoyed this video and may it be useful to you. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, thank you for today. Until we meet again, my dear friends.